wow. And then now it's AI in marketing. Wow. But pretty soon AI is just going to be table stakes, right? Not only in marketing, but other roles. And so we owe it to ourselves, to our teams, to our businesses, and our careers to really just be curious, learn what we don't know, and dive into specific elements that either interest us or interest the company or the teams that we work on.
Welcome to the B2B Playbook. We built this channel for small B2B marketing teams who want to drive more revenue for their business. Every week, we're showing you how to create more demand for your brand step by step using our 5Bs framework. So if you're time poor, resource strapped, but you still want to make a big impact on your business, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below so you don't miss an episode. Welcome back to the B2B Playbook. This week's interview is with Drew Brucker. Drew is a marketing leader and the founder of Brainchild. Brainchild helps brands create infinite brand images on demand using AI. It's pretty cool. You should definitely check it out. He's someone who has gotten really, really deep into how to utilize AI within the marketing space, and he's definitely a leader within our space. So it was so amazing to have Drew on the show to run through some practical examples of how to use LLMs and AI within day-to-day marketing activities.
It was a very practical episode, listeners, and this is really one that you have to check out on YouTube if you can, so you can see all the different examples and things that really come up in that conversation when he's running these tools in real time, so you can figure out exactly how to replicate the similar type of things for your own purposes and really get the full learnings from this episode. And importantly, I think the key thing to realize is that this episode is just so different from the other general information you see on AI out there these days. It's really exciting to bring this episode to you listeners so that you can see and hear some of the incredible things that you can do and jump in and get right away with very little effort, but very specific to marketing use cases, to the use cases that we're talking about here on the show day to day.
That's it, Kev. It's a super practical episode. There's a lot of visuals to this one, so make sure you check it out on YouTube. Okay, listeners and viewers, enjoy our conversation with Drew. Welcome back to the B2B Playbook. Listeners, as you know, we rarely have guests on our show. Instead, we select a few true experts who align with our view that B2B marketing is more about people, not platforms. Today, our special guest is Drew Brucker. Drew is a marketing leader and the founder of Brainchild. Brainchild helps brands create infinite brand images on demand using AI. He's going to help us humans get as much as possible out of these AI platforms. He's at the forefront of all things AI and how marketers can use it to make their lives easier. I've already picked up a ton of practical tips from him, so I'm very excited to have him here to share his knowledge with you. Drew, it's about time we had you on. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Man, let me just say it's an honor to be on the show and to be chatting with you. We've been LinkedIn friends for a long time, but we've become friends as well. And there's just a lot of overlap, even though we do different things. We're both in marketing, and I know we align on a lot of things as well. So I think this will be a good topic that we can dive into pretty deep and hopefully give some of your listeners some really actionable takeaways in the process.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. I think you're right. You and I have a lot of overlapping values, a lot of overlapping thoughts on what marketing is and what it should be. But you are definitely at the forefront of AI. I learned a lot of the things that I know about AI from you. And so I think it's really cool to have you on. Drew, you told me that when you were at Lasso that you actually made your team block out time in their calendar to play around with generative AI tools when it was really first coming to the forefront of everyone's mind. First of all, maybe you can strip things back for us and tell us what generative AI is, and take it easy on me. Maybe explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old, if that works. And then after that, it would be great to know why you made your team block out time to start playing around with it.
I guess the short answer is felt when ChatGPT launched, right, and became publicly accessible, which I feel is like the inflection point for a lot of us, right? The people that didn't have our hands on this in beta or for GPT-2, so that's sort of the signature moment. And I think it wasn't very hard to see that this was something massive, right? And something massive was coming, and it was going to change and evolve so many industries, so many jobs, so many responsibilities, and all the intricacies within those things, right? The smaller details. And so for me, I immediately recognized that. And just as a leader, right, it just felt important to think about things a little bit differently. In terms of the way we're doing things, we're already a small team, right, with limited resources, limited budget, at a fast paced startup, right? So prioritizing things and doing them efficiently and planning and sprinting to some of the goals or objectives you have are critically important. And so it just immediately spoke to me in terms of there's something to dive into here in terms of whether this can save us money, whether it can save us time, whether it can save us compromises that we've typically had to make in the past, right? Because of those constraints. And so that was really, I think, the jumping off point for me. And then, generative AI is the ability to help us humans create things that we might not be able to on our own or do it more efficiently. And so that's the key idea behind it, right? So that takes place in terms of text, in terms of images, in terms of videos, and all these other formats of content that we typically talk about as marketers.
I think that really sets the context nicely for this conversation because our listeners, I think, can really identify with your situation that you're in. You're in a small team with limited time, limited resources, a lot of pressure to get things done. And I think it's fantastic that you really dove deep into this. You got your team to look at how can we get the most out of these platforms and starting to learn and hone your craft in AI. And how did you start to hone your craft in generative AI? Where did you learn from?
Yeah, like at the time, I didn't even think about it in terms of honing the craft. I think there's a level of curiosity that I have and that most marketers have or should have, right? Where it's just, hey, I need to play and experiment with it. Just like with any marketing campaign or anything that you're doing in general, I feel like some of that's already ingrained in us, but I love to learn things that I don't know. I love to challenge existing perspectives that I have. And so this spoke to me both, I think, personally as a point of interest, but also professionally. And so maybe that really exacerbated in some ways my urgency to dive in and my willingness to dive in, because when I recognize how big of a thing this is going to be, and then taking into consideration this is going to affect my life both in and out of work, I need to know stuff. So for me, that compelled me to jump in and learn what I didn't know. And I didn't see it necessarily as a craft at the time. And I still do feel this way. I feel like it's just an inevitable change in the marketing landscape, but just the ecosystem in general of the world we live in. And, I feel like this could be, as it relates to marketing, one of those moments where we thought of traditional marketing and then it made its way to digital. And that was a big change, right? There were a lot of things that people didn't know. Marketers had to relearn, unlearn, learn new things. And this is a similar thing, right? It was marketing and then it's digital marketing. Wow. And then now it's AI in marketing. Wow. But pretty soon AI is just going to be table stakes, right? Not only in marketing, but other roles. And so we owe it to ourselves, to our teams, to our businesses, and our careers to really just be curious, learn what we don't know, and dive into specific elements that either interest us or interest the company or the teams that we work on.
I love, I guess, on the one hand, how you talk about we need to play around with these things. We need to understand how we can use it in tactical ways to try and get an edge. But I've seen how you can take that to the next level and you actually start to develop like proper frameworks around these things, which is where it goes from being something that you just toy around with every now and then to something that becomes genuinely useful, genuinely repeatable, and has very clear use cases. And you're going to take us through some frameworks a little bit later in today's show, which I'm very excited about. But Drew, so many people listening have probably played around with ChatGPT or Claude or maybe even Midjourney. And after that initial shock of, wow, oh my God, this thing is amazing, it all starts to wear off as they find it doesn't quite do enough for them. It doesn't do their task 100%, or maybe for a lot of people, not even 80%. What do you say to our listeners who have just dipped their toes in the water and then left this whole AI thing to one side?
I see most people falling into one of three categories. So I'll touch on that first, and then I'll go into, I think, some of the things that maybe could reframe their idea of how to leverage this appropriately. First things first, I usually use this analogy, but I think people fall into either a tourist stage, which is somebody that shows up once or twice, right? They visit AI, they visit a ChatGPT or a Claude, they play with it. They've got either a hyperbolic or understated appreciation for what it does, meaning they expect it to do really great things or just not great things at all, right? Because that's their initial perception of what's happening. Then you've got people that I would call commuters. So people that show up on occasion, right? They'll come in, they'll use the tools. They're not masters of the tool, but they know some things with it, right? And they're starting to, I guess, build that muscle in some way. And then third, I would say, you have the locals, right? People that are playing with this daily, people that know all the great spots, right? All the great tools. They know the use cases. They're aware of what's going on around them. And they're a little bit more ingrained in the culture of what's happening. And so the first thing I would ask is any listener listening, like, which category, honestly, do you find yourself in, and really rationalize why that is. Second, right, let's go into ways that you might be able to leverage this. I think it comes down to, you used the word craft earlier, and I think that's an interesting word for a couple of reasons. One, like, this is a new skill set, right? Prompting, that's not something we were taught in school. It's not something we've been doing it's not a language, right? We've been regularly communicating in our jobs. This is a new thing. A lot of people, let's just use ChatGPT as an obvious example here, will tell ChatGPT to do something, but they may not have enough context, right? It's not deep enough. It's not specific enough, or, right, it's not conversational, right? So they expect to put something in and get something out and be done, right? But you and I know, and other people know that have spent some time in this, that's just not the way that it works. And I don't know that it ever will get there, because at the end of the day, AI doesn't know what we're thinking, and there's some sort of intangible thing there that we have to provide. What's the goal I'm trying to achieve, right? And in what way do I want it presented, either visually or contextually or thoughtfully? What are those adjectives or those things that go into it that are going to get you what you need? And you need to be able to iterate on those things back and forth, right? We all know that you can't plug in and get it out. In a lot of ways with the prompting, it is truly about the quality and the context that you're putting in. With that in mind, like, that's part of it. So be willing to have a conversational approach and really go back and forth for a while, right? Like, I think we all get caught up in the speed of what this can do for us, right? Oh, I can do this faster. I can do this faster. It is about being faster. It is about being more efficient, but not at the expense of the quality. It goes back to that quality quantity thing. If I'm using it for content, yeah, it's great that it can produce all this content for me, but is it good? Because if it ain't good, then I don't care. And so I'm going to judge content that's written by AI the same I would if it were written by somebody on my team or myself or somebody else. And so I think we need to consider that as well. Third, I would just say the awareness factor really comes into play the more that you use this. And what I mean by that is the more use cases and ways you find to play with AI, naturally and organically, you begin to think of more and more ways to use it. Right? And, in a lot of ways, it comes down to that. I think if you were to ask me how I've used AI in the last even week, I could give you dozens of answers, right? Because there are just dozens of ways. Was it like that when I first started? No. And it's not like that for anybody that starts, because we don't really understand the depth, the context, and all the specific natures of how this technology works. Make yourself present, be consistent, find different use cases, experiment. This is nothing different for marketers. And naturally, over time, that immersion and that practice of putting it into play and opening your mind up to different possibilities are going to drive you forward with different use cases, different levels of depth in what you're getting back and that you can use.
I think something that's really kind of interesting that you mentioned there was this tension. Maybe there isn't a tension, but I feel like there is this tension between using AI to make things faster versus better. You mentioned there's this tension between speed and quality. Can you have the speed and the quality together if in an ideal world, you're a company with unlimited resources? Is it better just to have humans do everything, or can AI actually help us do things better as well?
This is where I think it really comes down to your comfort level, your understanding of the different capabilities you have with these tools. Because I think when you're early, you focus so much on speed and you're let down by the quality because you don't know how to properly input or prompt, right? Or communicate this language we talked about. So I think that's part of it. There are going to be some tasks that you don't need great quality for, right? Maybe you just need speed. And what I mean by that is if it's something like data aggregation, you're already going to get good quality, right? Like with that. It's more of a objective thing versus something that's subjective, which I think takes a little bit longer to get right in terms of, hey, is this good? Is this high quality? Is this what, my level is? Does it meet my level of expectation for this? And so I think that objective, subjective kind of nature is a good divider as well in terms of establishing, hey, do I need both of these things or do I just need one of these things? Going back to that comfort level of these tools though, right? If I'm doing things I've already done before, I've utilized ChatGPT before, or an LLM, or Midjourney, or anything, I know faster and better ways to get there because I've gone down that path before, right? And just like anything else, that experience factor opens up different pathways you could take. And so it's like, hey, if I'm using an LLM to write an email nurture series, that first time that I do it, it's probably going to suck, right? But by the time that I've done it a few times and I've started to incorporate different tones, different lengths, right? Informing the LLM of the goal that I'm trying to get out of it and the constraints that it has to work in, it's going to get better. And that's where some of these like prompting frameworks or templates come into play, right? Because it's basically saving you the time to repeat that process. And same with something like custom instructions in ChatGPT. It's got an area inside there, right, where you can plug in a bunch of context and constraints or directions that you're giving to the LLM that it uses every time. So you don't have to manually put it in every time, right? So things like that will not only save you time to get the better quality in the long run, but the more you use it, the better success you're going to see with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And my own personal experience was, I think I expected too much from the beginning. My expectation was when I was really starting to look into how I could use this for, our own marketing process, a big role that we see it play is how can this help us repurpose our content? So we record this podcast every week. From there, it becomes LinkedIn posts, articles, newsletters, all that kind of stuff. What I really wanted was for it to help us out writing these articles that are based on the podcast. Now, I put time into putting together a prompt framework, and the output always initially disappointed me. And I think that's because I was expecting it to take what would normally be a 2 to 3 hour task for me and do it in 1 minute. And I was naturally a little bit disappointed when it couldn't do it to 80% of my ability. But then I found as I chipped away at it over time, as I developed that prompt, as I had follow-up prompts, that I found that I could then take this 3 hour task and reduce it to 45 minutes to an hour. So it's not going to take me 30 seconds to a minute like I hoped and dreamed. But with a little bit of elbow grease, with refining this process, with going back and asking more questions, this is like a tool I could go back to again and again to actually take that task from 3 hours to 1 hour. That's still a 2 hour time saving. That's still enormous. I shouldn't be disappointed in that. But I think we just expect too much from it in the beginning.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the other tricky part about that is that it's saving you 2 hours, but it really doesn't hit you.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are moving too fast to really document every minute, every hour that we've saved using this, every dollar that we've saved using this. If you're in a company or a team where this is something that's talked about, but maybe some people are skeptical about, or you haven't proven this out yet, or you're taking it slow, or you want to start to dive in, I think that's a great way to show value and the ROI behind it is to really start to document time, money, compromise, the savings that you accomplish with one of those three things. And if you do that for a week or two, you're going to see some pretty absurd numbers. I think, but to your point, like now with things like document uploads and things like that, you could feed an LLM all this information about your business, right? Your personas, your brand voice, your style, the way that you write, your ICPs, their pain points, the challenges, right? Like competitor analysis. I mean, you could get there in other ways too, right? Like, let's just pretend you had these things in document. You throw all that in. And then now it's like I can ask a very specific question that it's going to get a lot closer to and take me a lot less time than if I'm starting from scratch and I got to say, hey, look, like here's my business, here's the ICP. So you do that once, right? And then it's front loaded work. You do that once and you've got that ability to move fast from here on out. And so I like to think about that. And I just did that even with my new company, right? Is standing this up. I'm building out a website. I want you to analyze my current website and throw back the FAQs that you think are the most pertinent for me to answer for visitors. Here's all the information on my business. I had all the ICPs documented. I have what my business is about, the pain points, right? My unique selling proposition, all of those things. And it had that and it said, hey, look, analyze the website, analyze my business, what's missing, right? So it's curing that blind spot. So as long as you have the context, you can get some really good quality output. And for that specific example, the FAQs were fantastic. And not only that, right? Like just built upon them and said, hey, look, answer these, right? Answer these.
Yeah.
And they were 90% of the way there, right? So you just think about how long it would take you to identify the right questions, right? And not guess. Also, come up with the answers for those things and write them in a way that sounds like you and feels good. And if, oh, by the way, if you want to add in an SEO value on top of that, right, to try to get them to rank or be optimized for search engine, I mean, that's another way you could leverage it. And that's the way that I leveraged it, right? By setting up those three things. And I did that in a matter of 10 minutes. It's just absurd. And you think about examples like that or SEO in general, right? To identify long tail keywords. These are things that would take you an entire afternoon, an entire day, several hours, right? And so you can do those immediately. But the important part here is to step back and observe and document how long, this would have taken you, how much money you would have spent here. What sacrifices would you had to have made if you didn't have this? Right? And be a conduit within your business to promote this because it is coming, it is inevitable. And you might as well be on toward the front of the line on this because this is going to change everything that we know about, our business environments and business in general. What does the next 10 years look like? None of us know.
Yeah, a lot is changing, and I'm so glad that we've got you here to help us guide through all of this. And you've already touched on some of the practical examples as to how people can use it right now. But how else can our listeners start to introduce AI into their marketing workflows each day? Have you got any other practical examples for us?
Yeah, but like one thing that LLMs are extraordinary at right now is brainstorming, right? You think about that activity as a marketer, as a team, we're in a lot of remote environments. Being on a video call with your team and being creative is harder now than it's ever been, right? So to be able to ideate and do it at scale is incredibly powerful. And I think that's the easiest place to jump in, to be honest, right? So, hey, one example we had, right? We did a customer only event while I was at Lasso. What do we call this thing? How do we create a theme around this? Okay, ChatGPT, here's our business. We've got this Wild West influence. Give us some names. Campfire. Okay, perfect. That sounds intimate. Sounds like a small group, which is exactly what this was. Now let's think about like the experience that we're going to have on site at the event. What do you think would go with this? Oh, scented candles that have like a campfire smell. Things like drinks and the names of those drinks that are on brand with campfire, right? So you got some, neat marketing type names to build out this experience, right? And so ideation is so massive, whether it's for something like a customer only event, it's the name of your email newsletter, it's the name of all the different possibilities that exist within words that you use, right? So like another tool that I would use a lot before AI is something like a thesaurus or synonyms. What's a better way to say this word? Fluency, right? So those things are pretty easy to start with. And then outside of that, I think it's like getting into more things like data aggregation, right? You've got a survey that you have your customers fill out or your prospects fill out. And it's not a yes or no field, right? It's an open text field. That takes freaking forever to go through and start to categorize these things and pull out all these answers, right? If you've got hundreds of answers, that's going to take your team a lot of time to dig through those and properly sort those. Well, with an LLM AI, right? You put that in a CSV, you plug that in, hey, I want you to go through these answers, categorize these based on, okay, if that's not the right category, give it some more context, and it'll eventually break those things out to a point that is grab and go, right? So data aggregation is big. You think about email nurture campaigns, right? How can I provide proper context around this? How many emails should I take to get this point across by give take? What are some of the best copywriting frameworks I can use and take into account with emails that I write or positioning on the website? So all that comes into play. You could think about this in terms of, hey, you've got a brand overhaul or a website overhaul. What should the UX be like? The possibilities are really endless. And I think that's where I always get a little bit hung up in terms of giving you a whole list, is because I've exhausted I keep going. I don't even think about it, but anything that you do that you find painful or that you find tedious, right? This is a perfect way in the door to start leveraging a tool like AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Bard, an LLM, or something else.
Awesome. Look, as you can see, listeners, like the possibilities really are endless. We will share some prompting frameworks. And I think, Drew, you're going to take us through maybe one or two in a little bit as well that you guys can use to get started. But you have really chosen to focus on one specific use case for generative AI, and that's about using it to help put together a whole lot of brand creative for companies. It's what you do with your company Brainchild. You do this for organizations. I'd love to dive more into that. Maybe you can tell us what that actually means in practice. What does it mean to use generative AI to put together brand creatives?
It's a great question. So when you think of ChatGPT or a Bard or an LLM, you think of text to text output, right? You're putting text in, you get text out. Maybe you get something slightly visual in terms of table, or and now you've got Dolly in there, right? So you can actually generate images in OpenAI. But Midjourney is essentially the text to image output of that. Midjourney specifically produces the highest quality images, in my opinion. It's the creator's preference for that particular solve, right? So you've got other competitors like a Dolly, like Leonardo, like Stable Diffusion. There are a few other, but Midjourney really is the preference there. And this idea of AI text to image generation started in a similar way to ChatGPT for me. I'm a photographer by hobby. I had kids a few years ago, and as soon as that happened, right, and COVID happened, and time for photography just went out the window. I didn't have the time to wake up early, stay up late, drive to locations, do some of the things that I wanted to do, but I still like that activity, and I love the aesthetic appeal of photography and what it provides. And when I discovered Midjourney, I quickly realized, hey, like, I can create anything I want from my desk, and I don't need all the logistical things in place to get there. So that was exciting to me. And I started playing around and experimenting like we're talking about. But it got to this point where the tool had gotten so much better, meaning Midjourney, in such a short period of time, where it went from, hey, this is like a fun thing to do, like to create images and think about different things that I want to create, to, oh, like this has utility in business. I could use this right now in my business. And so that's exactly what we like. If we go back to that campfire example of that customer only event that we did, right? We put up a landing page for this for customers to sign up, but we needed to tie something in thematically, visually as well, right? So not just the words, but how do we have something visually that matches? And what are our options? If we don't have AI, we got to find something that's stock photography, which sucks. It's painful to go through. It's a long time. People use the same images. Or I got to find a professional photographer or graphic designer or somebody that's going to pull this for me and pull a very specific image that's relative to my brand and who my brand is. The colors, the message that I'm trying to get across, right? And that's expensive and it takes time. So I put two and two together, and I thought there's this huge void that exists between stock photography and professional photography for teams, for brands, for marketers, right? Especially if you're a marketer, because somebody on your team, it might even be you, has gone through this exercise of, hey, I'm in a niche industry. I got to find relevant photography. I only have so many choices. It's like going to a thrift store or a bargain bin and just hoping something fits the right way. And even if that does, how do you repeat that and build out a library of images that are on brand to you? So I utilized Midjourney in this sense to create an image for this event. And I did that in a matter of minutes. Took a little bit of experimenting, but I'd already been playing around with the tool and created something that was very unique, custom to us, felt like it fit, the whole theme, and built that out at the event as well in terms of the slides that we did, the presentation. All of those images were created in Midjourney. And so that had images of our ICP, of equipment, AV equipment, which was relative to our industry, things that just didn't exist otherwise, right? There's not a lot of great photography out there for live event production, believe it or not. And most of the time for these events, they don't let photographers in. And so this is like a very hard space to access. And Midjourney allowed us to do that in a matter of minutes, right? And so we could dial in the colors, we could dial in the personas. How old are they? What do they look like? What do they wear? Where are they at location wise? And really get specific with the visual storytelling that we were trying to do, in addition to the words and the context we were providing. And so once that sort of happened, it was just a real life inflection point of, holy hell, like I think we just opened something up that, one, not a lot of people have even caught on to yet, but two, like this has legs. We could scale this. And so that's what we did, right? We built out an entire branded library, so to speak, for our team, that anytime our marketing team had to use an image for website, blogs, social, creative, presentations, collateral, anything, we had a library that you could pull from, right? And you just think about how much time and money that you save by doing that. And it's a no-brainer, right? And so that's where I became fascinated with that. And that's ultimately what led me to do some of the things that I'm doing right now with Brainchild.
And it's absolutely wild. Just think about that, listeners. Rather than spending all that time browsing through stock photography websites, which is the worst thing. I absolutely can't stand it. I'm sure you guys, it's a low point in your day when you have to do that. Nothing feels unique. Nothing feels on brand. It costs too much. You got a subscription. It never feels like it's really worth it. And it's just such a pain. It's such a pain to do that, to spend the time doing that. Imagine if you just had an on-demand library unique to your own brand, unique to your colors, unique to your ICP. And Drew, I think you said as well that so you can basically create a prompting framework or template which can help you generate additional images. And you can just keep adding these to your library.
Yeah.
So your database keeps growing. So you don't have to go back to stock photography websites. You don't have to get that photographer and arrange that shoot on site. You can just use this prompt framework. Is that correct?
That's totally correct. So let's dive into that just in case people don't know exactly what we mean by the prompt template thing for this. So the idea is, as I was going through this process of building out images of, let's just say, I knew I wanted a AV camera operator, right? In an event space. He's probably 50 years old. He's got a beard, yada, 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 right? Well, some of those parts are interchangeable, right? So it comes down to what is going to stay the same, right? Like, meaning, hey, I know my brand colors are yellow and black. I know that typically the location and the lighting for these are dark and moody, right? And so like thinking about who our brand is and some of those like intangible components was key, right? So I started to say, okay, these are the things that are going to stay the same to make sure that I can get consistent image looks, right, with these in terms of the colors and the lighting, which are two of the most important things in photography. And then by templates, we mean changing things out. So like I could say, hey, look, like here are my different ages of people that fit my ICP, or whether they're decision makers or they're end users, right? So it's like, hey, maybe I have some 30-year-olds, maybe I have some 40-year-olds, maybe I have some 50-year-olds. Okay, there are both men and women in the industry. Okay, so both genders. Okay, cool. Then maybe I go into ethnicities, right? Is it a diverse industry? Yes. Right. So I need to show images of white people, black people, Asian people, all of it, right? Because they're all involved in the industry, right? So that's powerful. And then you go into like these events that they wear a specific attire. They're not uniforms, but they're all black, right? And so it's like, okay, the all black kind of goes into like that stagnant, the color, the lighting part of the template. And then you can interchange things like the age, the position, right? So if it's a producer, or if it's a camera operator, if it's an audio engineer, the camera angle is another thing that I could play around with and interchange, right? So it's like, hey, I want a portrait, so something that's close and straight on, or I want somebody looking away, or I want this to be like an aerial view of a concert or a live event, right? So I think about those different things. And all of a sudden, I've got all these templates that can work time and time again. And so I started to create like basically 5 to 7 templates that I could just run in perpetuity anytime I needed new images, right? It's like, hey, look, like we've already used this guy or we've already used this gal. Let's just run more, right? And so you get that consistency, the cohesiveness of all your images, the specificity, the brand colors, the intangibles of who you are as a brand. And it compounds over time, right? Because people look at images and they're able to digest those 60,000 times faster than text, right? We focus a lot on text as marketers, right? Saying the right things, but showing the right things is just as important in an intention starved environment and the lack of focus that exists. You need to be able to capture somebody's attention and say things without saying things through images. And this solves that problem, right? And I don't think a lot of people really either understand that or haven't fully digested it yet. And I think that's going to be something that it's not an if this takes off, it's a when this takes off.
Yeah, 100%. I love how with that template, as you said, you can just update demographically, firmographically. Once you've built that out for our listeners, then they can just plug in what they need and they can get the output from it. I think that's pretty amazing. And to add to that, it helps with that concept of mirroring, right? As humans, when we see people who look like us, we immediately trust them more, which is why it's so
That's a great
important
point.
for your brand images to show your ICP so they can look back at themselves and go, oh, that person looks exactly like me. This company clearly gets me. And it's a neuromarketing principle, which really helps you establish and build.
That's a terrific point. I'm just going to read 2 other stats for you real quick because I have them in front of me. I was just going through these. And so I mentioned the visual information 60,000 times faster than text. But 2 other important parts. 2 is the 80-20 rule. So people actually remember up to 80% of what they see versus 20% of what they read. Okay. All right. So that's another really objective point of why this is so important. But lastly, 88% of consumers say authentic brand visuals significantly shape how they perceive a brand. How can you be authentic if you're using images that other businesses and brands are using with stock photography? And to your point, if they don't look like you, they're not the exact ICP, you're hodgepodging things together, that's not going to work, right? There's so much content, so many brands are doing the same thing as you. How are you going to be different? How are you going to stand out? You can't do it by doing the things that everybody else is doing, right? So this is an opportunity and a competitive advantage to dive into this.
Oh, no, it absolutely is. Those statistics are wild, and I absolutely believe them. And if you just think from your own point of view, what you remember about a particular brand, think about Coca-Cola, think about that red. It's so consistent. It's everywhere. And this isn't something that's just perfect, big, mature companies, but even younger ones too. You're spending all this money on your website, putting together your own brand identity. You've got to extend that to your visual images too. And you're probably not at the stage where you can afford to fly photographers around or go and really get a whole lot of stock images that just aren't going to resonate with your dream customer. You've got to use things like this to your advantage.
100%.
Drew, you've put together some prompting frameworks for us, for our listeners, that we're going to actually share as a free resource along with this episode. That's going to be in the show notes. It'll be at the b2bplaybook.com. So make sure you guys check that out. You've prepared a couple of frameworks for us now. I think one is for maybe use it ChatGPT, something a little bit more general that marketers can do, and then one that's really specific to Midjourney, which has a lot more to do with using it to help you with your brand creative. Can you maybe take us through each of those so our marketers can see how they can get started? Maybe take us through the more general one.
Yeah,
first.
sure. I would love to. Now, keep in mind with something with these templates too, right? These are not be all end alls, right? Templates are going to save you time. Doesn't mean you're not going to have to iterate on these things, right? So those same rules do apply. I'll just preface with that. And I think with this particular example that I'm going to provide on the ChatGPT side, this is going to be related to email, right? I know there are a lot of things that we could pull from. And actually, I think in the resource that we're going to provide, we're going to have things that are a little bit more across the board. But for this example, let's start with email, right? And let me walk you through how we set up this prompt in order to get better output, right? So first things first, right? Like setting some proper context for the thing that you're trying to achieve, right? So I'm prompting ChatGPT here with, you are cold email outreach GPT, you're a digital marketer who helps, right? And so this is where it becomes a little bit more of a template who help. And so in this case, we're going to just say solopreneurs get more results from their cold emails. You are a world-class expert in writing personalized and engaging cold email templates, right? So you're providing some context to ChatGPT. Now, here's where you get into the goal, right? What are you trying to get out of this? I want you to write 5 cold email templates based on the information about me and my business. So this is thinking after the fact that you've already provided some information, right? Either through a prompt or through documentation and uploading that. I will send these emails to potential leads. So the more information you can give in terms of the thing that you want it to do, what you're hoping to achieve, right? So the output and then the outcome, that's going to connect better results in what it feeds back. And then this is where you can get really specific in terms of the format and the specifics. So cold email structure, I want you to come up with a subject line, a personalization, address an elephant in the room, right? So something that this is acknowledging that this is a cold email casually. Have context, so explain why you're writing to them. Have an offer, right? So what value they'll receive, and then a CTA, right? And so you're asking ChatGPT to have all of this in the cold email. Now, here's some information you're providing about the cold email, right? So this is where it comes into maybe tone or some of the finer tune elements, right? So I want this to be concise, easy to scan, straightforward. This is also something you could say, hey, like I want to limit this to 250 words or 200 words or 100 words. Be creative and use conversational phrases, right? Use short sentences and simple words. Don't include more than 2 sentences in a paragraph, right? So you're adding some of these qualifiers within here. Don't ever include overused phrases like, I hope this email finds you well, or I stumbled upon your website, right? So some of those other things that could be pretty common, right? If you're not prompting at this deeper level in terms of the results that you would get back. Subject line shouldn't be salesy, make people curious, right? So these are all qualifiers. And then here's some additional information about me that I want ChatGPT to know. Here's my target audience that I'm sending for this email. Here's my business, right? Here's the desired CTA. So in my mind, here's where I want to send them. And then here's my tone of voice, right? And then also, this is something I like to do as well. Don't think of this in terms of just like a single output. You could ask for multiple outputs, right? So that gets you to your destination faster. So it's like, I want to compare this against 5 or 10 other things, right? So give me some different styles. I want you to come up with one that's creative, one that's concise, one that focuses on being excited, provocative, and confident. And then lastly, use Markdown to format your response, which basically just means like format with bold, italic spaces to make it perfectly formatted for execution. So let's just go ahead and run this just so you guys can get an example of what it turns back here.
This is awesome. And for those who are only listening, please check out YouTube. Drew is screen sharing currently, and he's showing these prompts. He's showing exactly what he puts into it. We'll share this prompting framework too on our website, but it's pretty cool to see this process happen in real time. The ChatGPT is currently spitting out a bunch of email templates based on Drew's instructions.
And this is where it gets a lot of fun, right? Because now that we've asked this for 5 different versions, you can take one and build on it that you really like, or you can take pieces of others, right? You're getting more information altogether to make better choices. So for this example, I could say, hey, look, like I really like concise, right? But maybe I don't like the subject line, right? So this is where you iterate. It's like, hey, subject line seems a little bland, right? I want to make this eye-catching. I want to make this, where there's no other choice but to open this email. Give me 12 more options, right? And just think about the ideation and brainstorming power that a tool like this has. And that's where you can get some really good results. So iterating on these things, you've got 5 templates here, all based on all of this context that you've provided. So this is a great way, right, to do things that you know you're going to use time and time again. If I'm doing cold emails, or if I'm doing email nurturing or something as a marketer where I'm going to do this time and time again, having a prompt template is a great thing to build or start to build on to save you time in that process. We were also talking about like custom instructions in ChatGPT. That's also really important. So if you're in here and you are watching the YouTube or the screen here, there's 3 buttons here, like 3 dots right here. You click this, go to custom instructions. And this is the area that you can upload or input a bunch of things for ChatGPT to keep in mind and do every time you prompt, right? So that way you don't have to, I misspelled something here, do it every single time, right? And so something like that saves me a ton of time and compounds over time as well. So we've got that. This is a great starting place because we could say, hey, look, I like one of these 5, or I want to combine pieces. Now let me iterate and build on here, right? And that's why it's never going to be a perfect scenario. There are going to be some things that are subjective to you that just AI either doesn't know or you just don't like. And that's okay. That's the expectation and what you should be comfortable with. So hopefully this provides like a little bit of insight into the value, right, of taking the time to provide all this context. You're going to get a lot closer to where you want to be. And over time, this is going to be something that you can utilize pretty frequently.
That's awesome. Would you mind just reading just maybe the shortest one out just for those listening so they can get an idea as to what the output is like and how it's followed your instructions?
Yeah. So let's just go with the first one, which is basically creative, right? Subject line, skyrocket your landing page impact, right? It's like, don't really get the line. I could iterate on that. But the email, it says, hey, name, I know, another cold email, right? But hear me out. I promise it's worth it. Your entrepreneurial journey at company name has caught my eye. Why? Because I think your website's landing page could be a sprinkle of magic. I craft landing pages that not only look stunning, but convert like crazy. Think of it as giving your online presence a superpower. How about I show you what I mean? Let's start with a case study of my recent work. Just say the word and it's yours. Right, so I think we could both agree there are pieces of this that feel really good and other parts where it's like, no, but like
there's stuff there that's good. I liked the analogy of what was it that making your online presence your superpower. Like there's something definitely in that. I always like those kind of like analogies, kind of like metaphors. I think they get points across really quickly. It's awesome how it's pulled that together. I think it's pretty simple, digestible. And we told it to be creative, and maybe the overall tone is maybe it's a tad lame. I don't know. That's my feeling. But then we've got other templates. We've instructed it to be more confident, more proactive. And I think you can blend them together.
And that's what I usually find myself doing, if I'm being honest, right? Because I just read 2 and 3 on here. They're not great, right? They're not good. And then I look at something like provocative and I'm like, okay, hey name, let's cut to the chase. I've been checking out company name in your landing page. I could do more, a lot more. I create landing pages that make your visitors stop and click. Curious? I've got a case study that speaks louder than words. Interested? It's pretty damn good. That doesn't sound cookie cutter, doesn't sound generic, right? Like you could you could put something in there that speaks a little bit more, like maybe you've got something objective, like a number in there that you throw in there, but that's pretty solid, right? So like I could take pieces of that along with that first one we read, and I've probably got something there, right? And so then it comes down to, hey, do I have the right subject line, preview text? If I'm not crazy about these, I iterate with ChatGPT and I have a conversation. I say, hey, look, I'm looking for something that's a little bit more provocative, eye-catching, where they have no choice but to be curious about clicking and opening this. And then you run that iteration and you probably get 20 really good ideas.
Exactly. And do the work. You have to do the work, and just think about how long it would have taken you to get to your first crappy draft. Marketers, we're all the same. Every first draft of something that we do is not where we want it to be. It takes us a lot of time to get there, and this is helping us get there much, much faster. And then the beauty of it is we can then get it, as Drew said, to keep iterating on this and making it better.
Yes. So like, just for this example, let's just go ahead and go with 4, right? But let's just say, hey, look, I really like number 4, but I don't like the subject line. It feels generic and unoriginal. I want to craft a concise, eye-catching subject line that's creative and original, giving the reader no other choice but to open, stemming from its curiosity. Spelling's not my strong point, George. Give me, and this is where you can really go crazy. It's like, give me 30 ideas.
Big task. And just think about if we had to do this on our own. Actually, while it's all putting together these results, Drew, something you said earlier really resonated with me was when you were looking to brainstorm, to be creative, you used to get the thesaurus out and used to try and look for synonyms and other adjectives and that kind of stuff to really pull together how you were feeling. But sometimes you don't know exactly what that is. And I always really struggled with that. And I very rarely found the right word to use in a particular context to really capture that feeling. And since I started using ChatGPT to just give it a general sense of what I'd like to convey, I just found it was amazing at understanding what I really wanted and just giving me starting points or something that I can get closer and closer to choosing that perfect word or that perfect turn of phrase to explain how I'm feeling in a relatable way.
Like I was at the point where I had Power Thesaurus, the website, as a bookmark, and it was in my top 5 bookmarks, right? Because I just used it all the time. So absolutely right. This is a great use case in general for that, for ideation. It's like, hey, look, like supercharge is overused. Give me 15 other ways to say this, right? That are less jargony, right? And don't feel hollow or shallow, that speak to a specific nature, right? So I use this, and it's really hard to say. I don't know how other people use this because it's not like we're all sitting on this long table where we can see what each other's doing all the time. Like the way that I use is ideation and brainstorming at scale. So even for this, it's like, hey, look, like I don't want to use an emoji. I don't want to use uncover or supercharge, right? So I might prompt again to eliminate those words and get a little bit closer because even some of these aren't great, right? But it's all about, hey, give me 15, give me 20, give me 25, 50 ideas for this. And it's like, well, the chances are I'm probably going to like something in there, right? And if not, I tweak it one more time and I try to get there again, right? So it's like that's one of the easier ways I think to use it, and one of the main ways that I use it that is extremely valuable. I think that's an important thing to bring up in general. But yeah, there are so many use cases. If you're a content marketer, just think about even proofreading, right? That would be a great mega prompt now that we're thinking about it, right, George? Hey, I want you to follow these guidelines in terms of editing and proofreading, and then basically you've got something you can run time and time again for anything that maybe your entire marketing team, or maybe you're the approver for all the content that goes out, that you just run every time and you don't even have to think about it. I think the real sort of thing that's in my mind right now, and I know we talked a little bit about, the how, when, and why to use these things. There are just some things that, AI could do, but maybe you still want to do them. And what I mean by that is I do think this is going to take away some of that creative muscle that we have, right? Because we're outsourcing it. And you do need to make sure that you're flexing that muscle yourself so it doesn't atrophy, right? Because it's convenient and it's nice to outsource a lot of these things to AI. But from a developmental standpoint, right, from a staying sharp standpoint, there are certain things that you also want to do yourself. So I think that's a good disclaimer as well.
Yeah, that's a nice balance. That's a very, very nice balance. And just coming back to this cold email example, you could even start to feed back the subject lines that are working for your business and feed that information in, get it to analyze, hey, these are the last 10, 20 subject lines we've used in our industry. Here's the open rates, here's the click-through rates, suggest a whole lot more based on that. And so it all seems to be about like the data that you start to feed back into it. And that's where it becomes really, really powerful too. And this has forever been true of AI. And I think it will be the same moving forward. Is look for additional content to be performance marketer, Google Ads, sort of our thing. We ran an account that spent $30 million a year. They were a very large airline. And every quarter, I'd put together a QBR quarterly presentation, present it to the CEO, And we talk about Google at the time, they were bringing out smart bidding. So this, quite a few years ago when smart bidding was really emerging, it was Google's way of saying, hey, we understand so much more than you performance marketers about every single person who makes a search on Google. Let us do your bids for you in the Google auction, and we will get you better bang for your buck. Now, the CEO of this airline, I think in a very astute manner, always pushed back on us and said, the issue with this is if everyone is using smart bidding, if my competitors are using smart bidding, then where's my advantage? Where's my competitive advantage? Because we're all competing for the same set of customers. We're using the same platform that's apparently going to control our bids in this Google auction. They're promising better bang for your buck. Where is my competitive advantage if we're competing for the same set of customers? And the answer inevitably became, well, it's in your data. It's in the data that you feed back to it. Sure, you are competing against other airlines for these same customers, but different airlines suit different types of customers. And it's about which set of customers is most suited to your airline and aggregating all of that data and then feeding that into Google's smart bidding AI machine and helping you optimize it there. That's where your competitive advantage is. And that exact same principle seems true here, is you and your competitors can all use these prompting frameworks. And if you get access to these prompting frameworks, you'll all be on even ground. But where you start to take things to the next level is where you feed in your
Yes.
own proprietary
Yes.
ideas. And that's where it really becomes
George,
useful.
that is gold. That is gold. That's such an important point to this. And you also pointed out something that's very interesting too, right? Like you mentioned email subject lines and going through that and feeding in your most successful ones. You're not thinking of that if this is your first or second time using the tool. You're just not. And that was like just a good unlock on the spot. But think about that. You're using objective data. So we've talked a lot about the creative aspect. And this is equally as interesting because you're taking all of this data that you already have and you're saying, give me more like this. So the subject lines is an interesting one. One thing that we did too, right, is take some of the customer insights in words that were shared, right? Pull out some of the things that have been shared most frequently, like sentiment analysis, right? You can dive really deep into pulling out all of that objective data, that qualitative data, and then to your point, building on top of it. Hey, find me more like this, right? Create me more like this. And to your point, at a certain level, yes, everybody's going to have access to these tools. It's going to be very intuitive and accessible. The obstacles and barriers to entry will be lower, but the awareness of how to use it, the depth and the context in which you use it, those are the things that are going to set you apart from everybody else. We can all Google stuff, but some people can find some crazy stuff on Google and some people can't, right? And that's just the reality. Is it's a skill set in itself and you need to hone it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a skill set. People need to bone up on it. They need to start exploring and using it for themselves. And then there's going to be specific niche use cases where, yeah, dip your toes in the water, understand what's possible. But at some point, I think it makes sense, Drew, for people to just outsource certain parts and hire someone like yourself to execute a very specific function, because you're there to save time, you're there to save money. The output is really good. And you've already put so many hours into this that the everyday marketer just doesn't have the time to put into getting this one specific use case together. So I would really encourage people to go and check that out. Drew, we've taken up so much of your time. Do we have time to go into a Midjourney prompt framework?
Yeah, let's
Is that
do
okay?
it. Let me go ahead and jump back in here. Let's share this. Right. So let's go into Midjourney. Go into my images. We'll go into Discord. So I know it's hard to say if you're familiar with Midjourney or not, but currently it goes through Discord in terms of generating these images. Midjourney is in the process as we speak. And by the time that this comes out, we'll have probably released it. The second part of their website, which will be able to generate images inside their own site and their own platform. So if you're looking at the screen right now, this is Midjourney's home screen. you can see this imagine coming soon. That's the part where you're going to be able to prompt within the tool itself, within the website itself.
Awesome.
So that's coming. That will probably be out by the time this releases. Now, going back to this, right, and how we come up with these, a lot of this is, and the process that I have at Brainchild is really understanding some things about the brand before I even take this on. Right? There are certain brand factors that come into play, meaning, and let me actually bring this up as well, meaning what colors are your brand, obviously, right? Who's your audience? But what are some of the adjectives associated with that? The feelings, the niche, what's your product service? We talked about the target audience, your age, ethnicity, clothing do they wear? What locations are they in, right? So all these things, key messages and values, subjects and elements, right? So what do you want pictures of besides people? Colors, right? The aesthetic nature of the photos, the different image sizes, right? For different platforms and channels that you use. So something on Instagram is sized differently than maybe something you want to use on LinkedIn and so forth. So all of these things take place. That's part of the discovery process that I run through with the clients. And then a lot of this is going in and experimenting, right? It's trying to understand what hierarchy and what level is going to really work. One of the things that I've developed here and what this looks like if you're looking at the screen is I could take this and the prompt that's here is close up of an AV event crew member wearing all black attire, candid editorial pose, in the style of photorealistic details, emotive faces, expressive, UHD image, tonal balance, yellow lighting, contrast, white balance. It's a lot of keywords, but these are all indicating very specific things. And so the point being with like a template like this is this breaks out, right? And I'm going to put brackets around these things so we can see this in real time. Right? So first bracket I put around is around close-up, right? Because that's a camera angle. We can interchange that. It doesn't have to be that way. That's another lever that we can pull with different prompts. AV event crew member, same thing, right? Because we may want a camera operator. We may want an audio engineer, like something that's more specific. Wearing all black attire. So depending on your brand, this could be something that's interchangeable or not, right? So like at Lasso, all of these crew members all wear black. So this is just a static part of the prompt. This pose is also something that's interchangeable, right? Because maybe I want them looking away from the camera, or I want them smiling, or I want this to be a lifestyle photo, like something that speaks a little bit differently. Because I think the goal with this too is get away from some of those stuffy, corny stock images that do exist. And so this adds some personality there. And then you get into some of the things, right, that feel more like static parts of the prompt, right? Because I want this to be photorealistic. Emotive faces or expressive just means I want them to have some sort of look that's specific, right? So here, this image here is given somebody that's a little bit more serious, but that doesn't mean they're all going to be that way, right? Because this is that same prompt, and it's like, okay, got a little bit more of a serious look there. And if we don't like that, we can change that up, right? We could say smiling, we could say disappointed, we could say jubilant, we could say outraged, right? Whatever those things are, that could be interchangeable. And then you get into like tonal balance. I want the contrast of this to feel good. I don't want there to be, trying to think how I can put this a little bit more simply. I don't want there to be a lack of contrast where it feels washed out, right? I want the black and the yellow to collide in a certain way. I know I want to have yellow lighting in this, right? Because then it feels super on point and specific to my brand, right? Our colors are yellow and black. This accomplishes that. There's got to be a good level of contrast, which we mentioned. In the white balance, meaning I don't want this yellow lighting necessarily to overpower good lighting in the sense that like his skin tone doesn't look the way that it should, right? I don't want his skin to look totally yellow. Right? I want there to be some balance there. And so that's what this is. Right. So we could change this up, right? So for the example of this, we could say side view portrait of an AV camera operator. And you know what we could also do, right, George, is we could say female, right? We could even say a 30-year-old female, like we could say 32-year-old female AV camera operator wearing all black attire. We could just leave this in, right? Like we could just say candid editorial pose. All this stuff is pretty static. So we could just, we'll go ahead and run this. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have my fast hours on here. So we get this back as soon as possible.
I can't wait to see what this spits out. And the image, if you're watching on YouTube, the images that Drew has already spit out using similar prompts, they're beautiful. They're very on brand and they match exactly what his prompts have requested. You have to go and check it out for yourself. It is absolutely
and
awesome
like
to
it
see.
becomes a little bit predictable at some point too with the prompt templates too, because in general, I know what I'm going to get to some degree. And so am I going to get 4 home runs out of that every time? No. So what it's going to do is it's going to give me 4 images, right? And from there, I can say, hey, look, I really like this one. I want you to increase the resolution and so I can save it. Or maybe I like the look and I want to make a little bit of a change, or I can click this button here and basically refresh this and rerun that same prompt to get 4 different iterations. So I'll go ahead and do that while we're looking at these 4. All right, so we've got 4 here, right? I could jump into this. Now, I think one thing that I noticed with these two is I could say, okay, maybe they look a little bit too glammed up, right? These more or less look like models to me.
Right? Yeah, that was my reaction too, was none of us really look like that.
Yes. So,
so
what we could do is like side view portrait of a 32-year-old female camera operator wearing all black attire. We could say like no makeup, or like what another one we could do is like maybe like documentary photography, like that keyword. Documentary feels a little bit more raw, right? And unperfected. No makeup. So I could try this one and see what we get back and see if that makes a little bit of a difference, right? Meanwhile, we ran that other one again just to see what we got back. And it's the same thing, right? These are great photos, but they almost look too good, right? So we need to make this look a little bit more photorealistic.
Yeah, it's almost, as we said, that principle of mirroring and people wanting to see themselves. I think if they saw that on your website, it all looks amazing, but it just looks a little bit too perfect. And so toning that down would be really useful. And it's so interesting to see here in these prompt frameworks, how you're able to draw on your knowledge of photography and obviously the hours and the experience that you've put into owning your craft with this tool, as to like how you can quickly adapt and know what to prompt it next to try and get
a lot of it's just reps, right? There are certain keywords that I know are going to dial in a little bit more photorealistic things, right? So if I use a particular lens in my prompt, or the word portrait sometimes too, or movie still or something like that, I'm probably going to get more realistic results, right? And then when it comes, women specifically, it's a little bit tough too, because you don't want them to look too perfect, right? So does that mean I need to maybe go in here and qualify that with a couple keywords? Yeah, I think so, right? And so I could go in, and I'm kind of doing this improv, so forgive me, but like we could say no makeup, documentary photography. We could say natural look, maybe.
We're going to be careful with what we say on camera here. This is an easy way for us to get ourselves in trouble.
That's true. No, but I think the point is you're trying to communicate in words that you want this to be a little bit more real. So we could say,
so you've updated it to say
no makeup, documentary style. Yeah. We also put in here natural look to see if that makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's generating. Let's see if we're still getting models back.
See, like this feels a little bit closer. Like this doesn't feel overdone. This one does. And what your people look like more than anything else, right? So if this is your person, this is great, right? If you're in fashion or somebody that is dialed up or whatever, this fits that. But the reality is for like live event production, right? These people the women aren't doused in makeup, right? To go move technical things around and set up a stage, right? And you need to take those qualifiers into account and then prompt based off those things, right? And so this kind of does that. The point being, right, like we're doing this improv, but you can find other keywords, or what's called tokens for that matter, to infuse with the prompt to dial that in further, right? So even this isn't perfect, right? And this is actually a newer prompt that I was playing with. I'm adjusting, I'm iterating, and that's the whole point of AI in general, right? It's giving me a good starting place, and now I just need to provide it with better context to complete my vision, right? And so that's the goal of this. And the truth is whenever I find these words that start to generate that output, then I save it, right? Like then I can use that time and time again. So it may take a little bit of experimentation and discovery in R&D, as I like to call it. But once I figured out those keywords or those tokens that I want to use for this, I don't have to think about them again. And I can mirror and I can duplicate that same look over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, for those who are listening, Drew's sitting here going, yeah, the output at the moment, it's okay. It needs work. If you just check out what we're looking at, it's pretty incredible. If you haven't seen how this stuff works, it is mind blowing what it's putting out based on his prompts. So please make sure you check it out. Yes, it's a starting point, but it's an incredible starting point. And he can just keep refining this more and more to get exactly the brand images that he
George, let me
wants.
show you one more example if we can. So there's another idea in here, and you can set up prompts separately, but I can basically do what's called permutations, not to get too far in the weeds here, but I can create these curly brackets around here and run several prompts at once. So I could say top down, meaning I want an aerial shot. I could do a macro close up, which is like super close up. And I could do say like a medium shot, right? So by doing that, it's going to generate 3 different prompts in a batch, each with these different qualifiers. So it's going to produce one with top down, one with macro close up, one medium, right? So I've got another template here that I've used before, and I can run this to create them even faster, right? So here's the prompt itself, right? So it's the camera angle is the thing that we're interchanging out. And then it's live event audio equipment, tonal balance, yellow lighting, contrast, white balance. And then we added aesthetically symmetrical, right? So it like gives it a little bit of appeal and a pop, right? Again, this is like another way that I can quickly develop images and basically put them into a brand library for my entire team to use over and over again, right? So like we could take a look at the top shot down. This provides a very interesting element to the look, right? So like we could look at these one by one. Here's the top down. Super cool, right? That's a unique shot.
Wow. That is
Those are freaking
awesome.
cool. Then I can go into macro close-up
Yeah.
of live event audio equipment. Awesome. This is like an audio board. And then I can go into a medium shot of this. And guess what? These all look cohesive, don't they, George?
Man, that they are all straight
And so like,
color palette. They're all following a brand guideline. And the images are so good. They really are conveying what you want them to convey. The brand colors are so cohesive. It looks so real.
so many of these are solid,
I'm
right?
blown
Like
away
I
by
could just
this.
take these, right? And it's like all of a sudden I've got, I mean, they're, I don't know, let's just say like 2 of each. All of a sudden you got 6 new images in a matter of seconds because of a template. And I could run these again. And it's like if I spent 30 minutes to an hour doing this one time a month, maybe one time a quarter, I could be good for a long time. You know what I mean? And that's if you don't want to reuse images. And so it's incredibly powerful. I think when a lot of people start to figure out how powerful this is, a lot more people are going to jump on board with it. But it's definitely a competitive advantage and something to start playing with.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for walking us through all of those and sharing some of your prompts. So again, listeners, Drew's going to share some of these prompt frameworks in a document that we're going to give away with this episode that you can check out at the B2B Playbook.com. Drew, you've been so generous with your time, and I just love what you shared with us. I love how you've distilled this down to frameworks. We're all about people over platforms here, but I think you found such a great way for humans and AI to work together to create a better output together. Again, these frameworks will be available in the show notes. If you're listening, please check out the YouTube episode as well. Before we round out the conversation, is there anything that you would like to direct our audience's attention to, or anything else that you'd like to add to the conversation?
I don't think I have anything, George. I think we covered a lot, man. We covered a lot. There's still a lot more that we could talk about, but I think from a takeaway standpoint, we probably held up our end of the bargain. And for all the listeners out there, you know, if you guys have any questions about anything that we've talked through, George or I'm available on LinkedIn. You can reach me there. I'd love to help out in your journey through AI, whether you're just getting started or you're just trying to refine things. So I'm happy to help. And man, it was a pleasure being on board and finally getting to chat with you, George, on the podcast, man.
Yeah, this was awesome. This was our longest recording ever and our longest show ever, which is just a result of the sheer effort that you've put into this and combined with my extreme interest in this. So thank you so much for being so generous with us, with our listeners. Really, really appreciate it. Listeners, make sure you go and check out Drew Brucker on LinkedIn. Check out Brainchild as well. It's very easy to find from his profile too. Drew, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it, man.
Cheers.
George, I think one of the best points to come out of that conversation with Drew is that AI is something that will obviously have a significant impact on marketing, workflows, and the like, and all our jobs. But right now, we have to temper expectations and understand that only by using it and putting in some of your own information and data and learning will the benefits start to compound over time. It's just like an Excel spreadsheet that you're building from scratch. That first session with it is going to be annoying as hell. It's going to take you forever to set it up just the way you like it. And it's still going to take time over the life cycle of using that spreadsheet to upkeep it. When things change, you have to add additional information into it. It's exactly the same with AI. You have to view it in the same way. It's not the same as actually having an assistant, a human assistant that you can go to tomorrow and say, do X, Y, Z for me, and they'll just figure out like a human will. It's more like an Excel spreadsheet that you have to build and nurture over time, and it'll get better and better. But the time savings are much higher than an Excel spreadsheet. It's going to compound a lot quicker over time. And it's really going to save you a lot of effort down the track.
That's it. And I think you touched on the key there, Kevin, and it's been my experience using these tools there is that you've really just got to get stuck into them. It's not going to save you 2 hours and 59 minutes from a 3-hour task from the get-go. It's not going to make it 1 minute, but it'll probably save you a couple hours. It might take that 3-hour task down to a 1-hour task. And that's really been our experience. That gives you time to learn and iterate on your prompts to get closer and closer to it, saving you the full 3 hours. But Kevin, I don't think it's going to be there anytime soon.
No, that's right. And I think that's exactly what AI is at the moment. It's something that you can start to invest in. It will start to pay dividends right from the get-go, but not all the way to your expectations. So temper those expectations and it will pay off in the long run. A couple of other key points from the conversation with Drew, aside from those practical examples, which again, we recommend you watch on YouTube if you haven't already to really get the full value of it. Generally, he shares that process of honing your prompts and what that process looks like. That's really going to be key for you as you start to delve into AI and play with it in your own processes.
Yeah, and look, images, they're so much more efficient as marketing tools compared to text. So these AI image generation tools will again become quite important because I guess images say so much more than words can.
And practice and iterate again and again. Just like when you first learn Excel, when you first learn those formulas, everyone might have access to all those same tools and frameworks, but maybe they don't have the same data and insights as your understanding of your own brand and customers. They don't have that work that you've put in to practice using those AI tools and using prompts and things like that. So feeding that information in as well as your time practicing on these tools is going to be the most effective way of what's going to set you apart from the competition, from your competition specifically, as well as in the industry of all these different people starting to use AI.
That's it. As per usual, there's no shortcuts, even to get to the shortcut. All right, listeners, put the work in. Go and find Drew Brucker on LinkedIn. He shares so much great stuff around the AI space and how marketers can use AI every day. So go and follow him there. And as always, Kevin and I are just so stoked that more and more of you are joining us every Monday by listening to the podcast or watching us on YouTube. And if we could ask one thing, it would be to please pass the show on to someone who might get value from it, or leave us a short review on whatever platform it is that you listen on. It's a huge help to us, our future listeners, and we'd really, really appreciate it. Take care. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, listeners. Catch you next week.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Drew. And thank you all listeners. Catch you all next week.